standard for a financial advisor.
So, what do you provide? Cookie-cutter portfolios like the rest of us?
No cookie-cutter portfolios here. Fisher Investments tailors portfolios to meet each client's goals and needs.
But you do sell investments that earn you high commissions, right? And make commissions when you make trades for your clients?
No, Fisher Investments doesn't sell any commission investment products, and we never earn commissions on trades.
So what's in it for you?
Fisher Investments fees are structured so we do better when our clients do better. When it comes to helping clients achieve a comfortable retirement, we're clearly different. Visit FisherInvestments.com to find out why investors like you switch to us. Fisher Investments, clearly different money management.
Investments in securities involve the risk of loss.
8:07. Checking the roads in the Team Hochberg Traffic Center with Jim Talamonte.
On Chicago's northwest side, ambulances are responding to a crash at Lincoln Avenue and Peterson. On the Eisenhower Expressway, outbound, a crash at Mill Road has cleared. But farther out at Lake Street, the exit is closed due to flooding associated with last night's rain and some construction in that area. Right now it's 29 minutes from downtown Chicago to 390. Inbound 29 as well. It's a bit congested approaching the Burns Circle. On I-55, traffic's heavy northbound River Road to Blodgett, southbound from Arsenal Road to River Road. Quite a few crashes to the north as that fog remains a factor. There's one in Gurnee, a new one, 132 at Rollins Road. That's traffic. I'm Jim Talamonte on AM 560 The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next in our 1-hour heating and air conditioning weather center. Cloudy, breezy this afternoon with a shower or thunderstorm hanging around, a high near 70. 55 at O'Hare, 57 Lakefront, 56 in Lansing, and 53 in Aurora. Your next news update is at 8:30 with breaking news as it happens. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. This was an interesting moment between the New York Political Press Corps and America's governor, as I understand it from the press coverage of him, Andrew Cuomo, about nursing homes. We've talked a bit about that because of the significant percentage of COVID-19 deaths that have occurred in nursing homes in this country, in Western Europe. It is remarkable. Significant. In Massachusetts, it's more than 50% of all COVID-19 deaths.
Yep.
And so
in Sweden, it's a good percentage of their deaths as well.
They
have about 100 plus in a nursing home at any given time. They have very large nursing homes in that country.
Western European countries, a handful of them, from a low of a projected 33% in a place like Portugal to up to 2/3 in a place like Norway. Significant. And so it sort of undermines the way that the nature of the coverage, not necessarily always the specifics of the coverage, media coverage, but certainly the nature of it, which is everybody's equally vulnerable. Anybody can get it, and therefore the lethality risk is equal. Even when they qualify and say, no, but it especially targets the elderly and those with underlying conditions, the implication is we're all in it together. We're all in it together. Isn't that it? Isn't that the mantra?
All in Illinois, yeah.
And so Andrew Cuomo, who issued an executive order requiring nursing homes to take and treat COVID-19 patients, had this to say when he was asked about a nursing home that threw his hands up and said, we can't handle it. We don't have the staff.
I can't, just whatever reason they want, they call the Department of Health and they say, you take Bernadette. I can't handle her. And the Department of Health takes her. Now, when the Department of Health takes Bernadette, they no longer get paid for Bernadette. Oh, money. Go ahead.
So capacity, could a nursing home patient go to a hospital then? So if a nursing home is overcapacitated, they can't handle their patients, could a patient be transferred back to a hospital, and the hospital could then care for this person?
Yeah.
That can happen?
Yes.
Have you guys gotten requests for that? No,
Not yet.
Not yet?
That's odd that they haven't gotten a request for that. Something else Angel Cooper said, oh, money. Oh, I see. Nursing homes are the only one interested in the resources they need to operate. Is that right, Governor? Aren't you the governor that's been prattling on for the last week about how dare Mitch McConnell extend a lifeline to mismanaged states like New York or Illinois by suggesting that he would support a provision that states could declare bankruptcy so as to reorganize, say, their unfunded pension liabilities, because you want blank check block grants? So I see. When it comes to beating your tin cup against CNN cameras for federal money for New York City and New York State, as you've been doing for weeks, actually, I wouldn't have passed. I wouldn't have signed on to the refill of the payroll protection program without an inclusion of state and local funding, because I know they don't want to do it, and that's what I want. So when it comes to government's bottom line and the money you want from somewhere else to paper over how New York State has been governed for generations, going back to your father, frankly, that's okay. When a nursing home would make any sort of overture about resources to operate, to care for its residents, that's unseemly. You get the mentality? That was an important moment there, just to give you an indication of the differing philosophies. Government-centric philosophy, we have it in Illinois, and you see it throughout the country. Certainly the press has it. Versus private sector-oriented. Which comes first? The public sector to open so the private sector can, or the private sector to open so the public sector can exist? Big philosophical divide in this country on that topic. For more on the lockdowns and all other things COVID-19 related, we're pleased to be joined by Lyman Stone. He's an adjunct fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, a research fellow at the Institute for Family Studies, and former international economist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I'll try to holster my Department of Agriculture jokes. Lyman Stone, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure to be on here.
You ask a good question in your piece that I read from the public discourse about lockdowns and why they don't work. You say, well, what's your evidence that lockdowns don't work, you're asked. Well, shouldn't it be in the moving party to present their case in chief? Shouldn't those who want to impose a lockdown, given all the associated costs, have evidence that it works, rather than me having to disprove that it works?
Exactly. I mean, we're in a situation where we have some pretty serious policies being advocated that can have a very dramatic impact on everyday people's lives. And they're being advocated in often, frankly, an evidence-free environment.
Right. And then just give us a little bit of your look back at 70 or 80 years of history in the West and what you find about lockdowns.
Right. So we can go back and we can look at previous epidemic outbreaks, whether it's the 1918 flu pandemic, the 1929 flu pandemic, the Hong Kong flu, the Asian flu. The U.S. has used a lot of strategies to try and deal with epidemics, a lot of successful strategies, school closures, centralized quarantine, mask requirements. What we've never done, what has never really been tried and hasn't really been tested, is locking down all of society. The first time that was really tried in a documented and scientifically studied way was in Liberia during Ebola. But they only locked the country down for about 72 hours. And even then, it was only to enable a door-to-door information campaign, not to just keep everyone locked up indefinitely. China was really the pioneer of the lock everyone up and threaten them to stay home strategy, which, of course, they were. It's like the most communist strategy you can imagine.
Oh, they're already locked up.
Right, yeah. They weren't locked down. They were locked up. But they kind of came up with this strategy, and then the World Health Organization was very, very impressed with it. And so they kind of promoted it to everyone around the world. And then everyone around the world kind of just got on board. And so they adopted lockdowns instead of much more effective strategies. Now, the remarkable thing is the countries around China obviously are more used to working with China. They're a little bit savvier. And so they basically knew that China was lying through its teeth the whole time. So like Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Vietnam, these countries all had extremely successful COVID responses. Wall Street Journal just ran an article highlighting Vietnam's response today. It's worth a read. And the takeaway from all of them is none of them adopted widespread lockdown. None of them. They're the most successful documented cases of crushing COVID in the world, and not one of them adopted China's strategy, because all of them knew from the get-go China's lying. But for whatever reason, the Western world just kind of swallowed the lie and has adopted lockdowns that don't have historical evidence to support them, and that aren't accruing new evidence as the pandemic proceeds.
And once you open up Pandora's box and take school away, you're not going to get that back anytime soon. No. Now, school, I wouldn't count closing down school as a lockdown. My definition of a lockdown is pretty precise. That is, it involves an order for people to remain at home. It involves a closure of non-essential businesses. And it involves a ban on assemblies above a very low threshold. So if you've got these three features, it's a lockdown. But to me, closing school, that's not a lockdown. That's school closes for the summer. School closes for Christmas. School closes for too much snow. Or in Kentucky, where I'm from, school closes for the threat of snow, whether it comes or not. Closing school, when people want to moan and complain about, oh, school's closed, they're locking society down. Is society locked down on Christmas? No. So school closures are disruptive, but there is actually some evidence that they work. There is not evidence that ordering people to stay home works.
Right.
In fact, what's that?
No, I was going to say, in fact, there's a lot of countervailing evidence, actually.
Yeah, exactly. So we can look at the example of countries that have had lockdowns for several weeks now, and we can see if lockdowns work as intended and they break the chain of transmission, there should be a decline of deaths at a specified point in time. In my article, I argued that it was 20 days, but it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. But say it's 20 days just for convenience, and trust me that the math works out even if you use a more complicated calculation here. But it takes a certain amount of time for an infection of COVID to become a death. And deaths are our most reliably reported data. So we can look at deaths, and we can use that to backtrack when did the spread of the disease start to decline. And what we can see is it's pretty reliably a few days before lockdowns. That is, the peak in deaths comes a few days too early. Now, you might at first think, well, maybe, Lyman, maybe we're just wrong about how long it takes COVID to kill people. Maybe we're just being too precise for our own good, and we just need to accept some uncertainty. But I think there's a way simpler explanation. And the explanation is people began to socially distance before lockdowns occurred. In every country in the world, everywhere you look, what you can see is that people were voluntarily socially distancing, and they were complying with less invasive regulations for days or weeks before lockdowns came into force.
Well, right.
Which to me said,
yeah, I mean, you had the Trump task force promulgate their guidelines, their 15-day guidelines initially mid-March before virtually all of the lockdowns occurred.
So March 16th, you get the guidelines. Earlier than that, March 13th, Trump declares a national emergency. March 11th, we get the European travel ban. In fact, my research suggests that sometime between March 8th and March 12th, every state in America, except for Washington and California, where it began earlier, began widespread social distancing measures. And in almost every state, those measures were complete before shelter-in-place orders went out. And that is, there is almost no evidence that U.S. shelter-in-place orders did anything to increase social distancing.
But the more we test people, I think the lower the death rate's going to be. And people are getting tested. I mean, there's pop-up COVID testing sites all over. And that's what we need to do, don't you think, to get back to our normal lives?
Yeah, absolutely. We need a huge testing program. But the problem is, what do you do with a person once they're tested? You know, we talk a lot about test and trace, test and trace, test and trace. Well, just because you test someone, say, hey, you're positive, that doesn't prevent them from infecting other people. Right now, what we do is we sort of say, tut, tut, go home and stay in your house. This doesn't work. At-home quarantine, and essentially voluntary quarantine, is not an effective strategy for managing disease. Those people, they have family at home, visitors come, they disobey the order, spread continues. To effectively break transmission, when you test someone, you then need to put them in centralized mandatory quarantine. If possible, ideally, you would separate them from their family, though, of course, people with care responsibilities, you can't do that. Now, I know this sounds draconian, like this is worse than lockdown, but if your option is 100% of society be forced to stay inside, or 3% of society be forced to spend 2 weeks in a hotel room while we monitor them to make sure their case doesn't progress to a severe condition, I'll take the 3%. Centralized quarantine is the strategy that ultimately China had to use to beat their epidemic. It's the strategy we use in Hong Kong that we've used to beat the epidemic. We haven't had a new case in 3 days now. It's the strategy that Vietnam used to beat their epidemic. It's the strategy that Korea used to beat their epidemic. It's the strategy that Singapore uses. Centralized quarantine is the silver bullet. But Western societies are instead choosing to just keep people locked down indefinitely instead of using centralized quarantine. So test and trace is great. I'm all for it. We need more testing. The question is, what do you do with someone once you test them? Yeah. The only answer that works is centralized quarantine.
Although that will receive a lot of resistance, and probably more resistance than it would have if it was initially the approach, because of the general lockdowns over the last several weeks and because of what you've seen in terms of abuse by politicians, whether it's through orders or through the implementation of their orders. And so it seems to me, as states are opening up, 24 states at some phase of opening up now, it seems to me that's going to be a difficult argument to make.
Exactly. There's been so much, we have this phrase security theater, right? This is like when we have security procedures that don't actually keep us safe, they just make us feel like they're keeping us safe. So this is like the TSA's entire job, right? We've had the same thing going on. Yeah. So we've had the same thing going on with COVID. We've had like epidemic theater, right? We need to do a lockdown because that'll keep us safe. No, it doesn't. Within household transmission is the dominant pathway of transmission. I heard you talking earlier about nursing home transmission. That's a huge component. It doesn't matter how tight you lock things down. If it's passing through nursing homes and prisons and other institutional quarters, you're going to get a lot of deaths. So lockdowns are like security theater for epidemics. What we need is actual security. What we need is an actual response, centralized quarantine. And you're absolutely right that the grievous mistake of adopting general lockdowns has, I think, corroded a lot of public will to cooperate. So if politicians want to take a better strategy, I think what they need to do is they need to clearly communicate the lockdown. We recognize now that we thought it might work, but we've realized that it was not the best strategy. We have a better strategy. So we hear you, protesters. We hear you, everybody upset about this. We are ending the lockdown. But the trade-off is we want to try this other thing, centralized quarantine. We know it won't sound great. We know that you don't want to be sent to a hotel or a government site or whatever. But please trust us. It's better than the lockdown, and that's the trade. We come out of lockdown. We get centralized quarantine. Trade-off.
May work if you say, please trust us, because that's the kiss of death right there. Lyman Stone, adjunct fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, research fellow at the Institute for Family Studies, and former international economist at the U.S. Department of Ag. Lyman, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Take care.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy on the AM 560 The Answer mobile app. Just text the word app to 64636 to download the app today.